Kelly. Always down to do that. Do we need to do special convocation?
Hey, Eric, you can just let people in as they come in. Go ahead and get started.
No, that's fine. Just want a response space.
Hey, Lindy, Lindy had asked roughly how long. I anticipate we're going to try to get this done by about 7:30. We want to be sensitive to questions that come in, so we'll go ahead and get started. And then, yeah, we'll try to get you out of here. For those of you who have to jump off, some of you have other Zoom calls or board meetings that you're running into tonight. If anything like that's happening, know that we're going to record this session. So we'll make that available after the call. It'll be available on our Facebook page. We got a YouTube channel, and we'll send it out via email to everyone who participated as well. Okay. All right. Oh. Well, hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. For those of you in person and online, we appreciate the opportunity to do more of these, getting together in person. And hopefully our numbers will start to grow. So appreciate all of you who came in tonight. I think, and for those of you who have either participated in this session before or any of our webinars, just very grateful to have Adam here. He does such a phenomenal job of just kind of giving everyone at least the foundational items of what you need in order to get started. For those of you who are new to your boards, understanding the fundamentals of being on the board, but also a good refresher for those of you who have been on your board for a while. This is also a great opportunity to ask questions. And as we go through topics, if there's anything pertaining to situations that you're working through and want to benefit from Adam's guidance or from those on the call, we'd love to share best practices and talk through those items. So this is our Board 101. We're actually working with Adam on and his team on a day of education. Likely will be on a Saturday. We'll work through the details on that, but sometime maybe early summer where we have an opportunity to come in and we'll do kind of a board member boot camp, which is pretty exciting. Something that for those of you who haven't participated in Adam's firm's events, they do these around the state and they're excellent. So looking forward to bringing one of those in-house and just kind of unpacking all kinds of different topics and really equipping you with some really good resources, some really good answers to your questions. We'll go ahead and get started. And I've got about 10-15 minutes of things that I wanted to run you through from the Goodwin side, and then we'll get Adam rolling on all the important stuff. Adam, do you want to introduce yourself before we get going?
Sure. My name is Adam Pugh. I've been an HOA lawyer for the better part of about 17 years now. I'm with the law firm of Cagle Pugh. My law partner is Greg Cagle. He wrote the book on HOA law. Literally, it's called Texas HOA Law. And so we serve HOAs all over the state of Texas. And I'm happy to answer your questions and be here tonight. So
yeah.
Thanks, Mitch.
Awesome. For those of you who are on joining us online, I tend to, if you've joined us on these webinars, I tend to mute everybody and keep everyone muted. I've had enough experiences at board meetings and other things where somebody just has something crazy going on in the background and then we can't shut that off and it just becomes a big distraction. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit that into the chat. For those of you in person, just raise your hand and then we'll try to get to everybody. If there's a more involved question, we can unpause or unmute you and we can get you going through the audio. So apologize for those of you who have to do a little extra typing. Also know that we'll send you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation in notes form. So you have that and you can reference that should you need it. Okay. All right. Hopefully this works. Derek, you may need to,
Nope, let me know.
looks like you have to admit somebody. Okay. I referenced this earlier, but just wanted to remind everyone on our Goodwin. So if you go on, for those of you who are on Facebook, Goodwin & Co., you can find our Facebook page. Under there's a video section. And all of these board educational seminars, we try to do one at least one a month, if not every other month, depending on what we've got going on. But that's typically what we try to do. And we try to do these board member one-on-ones on a quarterly basis. Adam has been gracious with his time and helping us with the onboarding of new board members and just getting you going. So that's kind of a mainstay in our schedule. And then we've got all kinds of other things that we record and we put on Facebook. We send out via email and also on our YouTube page that we just started and just starting to upload new content as we get going. All right. For my new board members, just wanted to offer just a quick run through of some of the resources that we make available. For those of you who are, and we saw some of the questions ahead of the presentation today, how do I create engagement with my homeowners? What are things that I can do to get up to speed on what's going on in the community? I always try to point folks to Town Square as serving as kind of the central basis for communication within our communities. Town Square is where you have access to financial reports, governing documents. There's a section in there about manager assignments. I'll walk you through a little bit of that in a second. Homeowner requests, not that you have to answer them, but there's a place in there where you can just kind of keep up with what's going on in case you want to hear or see how we're handling different questions that are coming in from our homeowners. You have the opportunity to post polls, chat with board members, and I'll show you where there's a chat forum that's not often used, but something that I always like to highlight as a great place to collaborate as a board rather than having a million emails flying back and forth and trying to keep all that communication organized. There's also, for those of you who are on the board, please know that there's a board portal, and hopefully we have a process every time we onboard a new board member. You should be receiving an introductory email that includes the access information into our BMS board portal. Now that's separate and apart from Town Square. It actually is back-end access into our accounting software so that you can download and view live financial reports. So obviously our financial reports are published once a month after the books close for the month. But the board portal is very helpful. You can run a balance sheet any given day. You can run different date ranges for financial reports, all kinds of good stuff. If you want to see any folks who have moved into the neighborhood, there's a close of escrow report, so you can see, for those of you who have welcome committees and such, a great report to run to just see some of the activity of who's moving into the community. And certainly one of the things that we always want to do is make sure that you get to know our leadership team here at Goodwin. So behind that manager that you work with every day, there's also in the back, you've got some of our leadership team. We want you to know our director. Chris Larson is our senior vice president of community management. Casey's one of our directors here in Austin. And certainly you'll get to hear from myself in regular communication, but we want to get to know you. We want to build a relationship with you if there's ever anything that's going on. I know we're a pretty hands-on group, and we want to make sure that we're helping you and creating value for you every single day. Couple of the items that I referenced, there's I actually refreshed assignment section in Town Square, and it's actually got a couple more updates coming. But for my board members, I know just from I've been on my board of my HOA and being on the other side, on the operations side, I know what a struggle it could be if we're not all rallying off of one central to-do list. And so that section is one that I try to push really hard for our team to utilize, and sometimes and also just our board members to utilize. It's basically a place where you can go input deliverables, right? Who's working on what? You can take any task that's going on in the community, whether it's something that our manager's working on, something that one of our departments is working on, something that that's you or your fellow board members are working on, and we can move these assignments back and forth. So if our manager just completed a task and now it's onto the board to vote on, we can record that here, assign it to each other, and everybody has a good handle on, what's on our plate, when is it coming due. We can categorize it by subject and topic. So really helpful place to just kind of keep things in focus as to what's going on. I mentioned that there's also this board member forum. The board member forum is it's actually just an open forum, but many folks worry about a place where or homeowners can go and just kind of complain. But I will tell you that there's a lot of good use for those forums. I've got communities, there's a community just down the street from here, Balcones, and they are masters at making use of that forum. And the amount of communication going on is so positive. And I always worry that, we fear that somebody's just going to go in here and blast the board or blast management, but really it's a place where, just like that communication that's happening on Facebook already, it could be a place where we can moderate and we can manage communication and allow for more collaboration as a community. And that's something that I think is impactful. You can also lock that down to just the board to communicate. So oftentimes, I know just from when you've got, for those of you who've been on your board for years, you probably have, thousands of emails going back and forth related to association business. And Adam will tell you, if we ever get into discovery on something, it is messy, right? When we're co-mingling, mingling our personal lives with our board lives and everything else. It's really nice to create a little separation around that. You can organize items by topic or by group, and then have a place where you can chat. You can attach documents and just kind of keep one flow of communication going in that forum. So just little things that are good communication tools that oftentimes we don't make enough use out of. The news and event section in Town Square, always like to highlight that as board members, you have admin access into Town Square. And if for whatever reason you don't, please let us know. But by default, we set those up so that you have the same access that we do. We want to be transparent. We want you to be able to see what's going on all across the community in terms of communication. But also, if there's something that you want to post as a member of the board, or updates that you want to just send out, or even making use of our website that's tied into Town Square, we make those available to you, and they're highly customizable. One thing that I sent out in our board update last week was the ability to we can buy you a custom domain. It's like cheap. It's like $40 or $50 for 3 years to own your domain, $50 for like 5 years, like $100 for a decade, right? But you own your own community, customized domain. And what I like about that is that it allows for you as a community to reference one jump off point for homeowner communication. So you can say, reserve at westcreek.com or .org. You can have it a place where folks can go into seeing what's going on in the community. And then Town Square is basically what happens behind the login for homeowner information. But a great starting point, and something that today, without a custom domain, you have to go to goodwintx.com, find your community from the top right-hand corner, and then, and then jump into it. So it's not as intuitive as just saying, hey, let's buy a domain, plug it right in, and then folks can log in the top right-hand corner into their Town Square account. So just a thought there, just a really helpful tool. Surveys are a thing that I don't see enough of us use. If there's a big decision weighing on the board, a big investment, and it's not maybe necessarily something that you are that you need to have the homeowners vote on, but if you want to just get some feedback, right? Like, hey, we're looking at a capital improvement project for our playgrounds. It's going to run us about $25,000 to make the improvements and upgrades that we want. What do you think about the expense? Or if you're weighing an investment on 2 separate projects and you want to get some advice from the community and just kind of get the pulse of the community, you can do that very easily in the survey section, or we can set that up for you. The surveys is also morphed into a new feature that also allows for online community voting, which is pretty exciting as well. So we can handle any community votes within the system, and that's really nice because it's already integrated into Town Square. And then there's a whole documents repository, which many of you are aware of. The document section is where the financials are delivered every month, and it's where your governing documents are stored. The document section also can be, you can create a category that's visible to the website so that you create a page on your website for any other documents that we want to upload. Any helpful forms, references, resources, we can easily upload them into the document section and then make them visible on the website, which is pretty helpful. There's a new architectural review feature that is fantastic for those of you who are still using the old-fashioned paper forms. Please don't do that anymore. It is so much easier from a homeowner communication standpoint. We can create custom forms by project type. So if you're going to have a form for fence installation, or a form for paint colors, or a form for roofs, we can create custom forms in the ACC feature. And then everything from the information submitted to the homeowner, getting your architectural review board or ACC, whatever we call it, getting them plugged in here. They can see all of the requests as they come through. They can vote on it. And then we would handle sending out the letter, the verdict letter that says whether the project was approved, denied, approved with conditions, the whole nine. And then it'll keep an archived history of all of those applications as they come through. But the nice thing is gone are the days where the homeowner has to say, hey, where are we with my application? I've got the pool vendor, he's ready to install. I need to know what's going on. They can track this little progress bar from their view and see, you know, where we are. Some of us are dealing with dozens, if not hundreds of ACC applications on a regular basis. And this is a really helpful tool to just say, hey, come on in here and let us know how we can help. One of the things that actually came as a result of doing these sessions, when we did we did a legislative update in person and online training last year, third quarter of last year or so, after the legislature met and decided what they wanted to do to complicate our lives. One of the things that we heard when board members were now denied in HOA subdivisions, were now denied being able to serve on their ACC committee. Many of you said, hey, I don't have folks to help with this ACC process. Can you help us? And so one of the things that we've stood up within the organization is now a unit that will handle both reviews and approvals in lieu of, for those of you, especially those of you in smaller communities where you don't have the volunteers, we can help with that effort. And one of the other cool features that is available is the ability for the association to set a charge for an ACC review. Some communities have always had a standing charge. Others now with the legislative changes have outsourced that effort to a third party. So it's a potential revenue stream, but it does cover administrative costs. So if you set, especially for some of the more difficult reviews, some of you who are in communities with developing lots, builder review is a little more complicated process. You could set a fee for those reviews, and that could either be a revenue stream to you or it goes to us to offset the expense. You can set the price at whatever you want. We don't really care, but we can offer you some guidance on how that gets going, how we can set that up if that's a pain point in your community. One thing that I always like to offer to our boards, and especially those who are new to your board, and for those who are kind of coming into a board where you've got a lot of change and a lot of turnover, and you're just trying to figure out how to get things on track, get them organized, and really figure out how to make the most of your time on your board, is the concept of really setting objectives, right? We oftentimes approach our communities as, you know, an afterthought, not necessarily an afterthought, but we don't treat it as the business that these are. Some of you are representing communities that have, you know, over $1 million budget annually, and that's a big business, right? Some of you have some significant reserves, and you've got a lot in the way of projects that are going on. And one of the things that becomes very difficult as a board is, and certainly becomes harder for us as management, is if we don't have a clear vision of what we want to accomplish in a given year. And so just like we do in business, we want to make sure that we're doing the same when it comes to our associations. Derek, I think we flipped to the other, one forward, please. Is that we want to come up with a strategic plan. And so one of the things that we use as an organization is this process called OKRs, objectives and key results. And it's a very simple process. You may be using it in your professional life, but it's a very simple process. So objectives are where you'd like to go. And so let's say that Lisa's community is big on engagement of their community. And a big part of creating that engagement is also lifestyle, right? And being able to put on events that bring the community together. So an objective for Reserve would be something like we want to be the most family friendly or family centric community. And so you make this statement of what you want to be, and you can have 3 or 5 of these statements. And then these key results, they're not measurable statements. They are overarching, big, hairy, audacious objectives. And then the key results are basically, how are we going to get there? And so you'll say that we want to have 12 community events this year. So basically 1 community event a month. And so that is the one of the key results that if we can check that box, we have impacted our objective. Another might be qualitative. It might say that we want to get a 4 out of 5 star review on the events that we've had with our post-event surveys. And so we would create that as a key result. That we want to have X percentage of our community participate in a given event in a year. And so that would be another. Another objective would be, let's say, financial management. So let's say on the financial management side, we want to have a sound financial plan for the operation of our association would be our objective. The key result would be we want to minimize accounts receivables by year end by X percent, right? So let's say any outstanding accounts, we want to minimize those outstanding balances by 15%, depending on what you've got going on as a key result. And so the idea there is that as a board, you come together and say, what do we want to do? What do we want to be as a community? And we'll help you through that process. And the key results say, hey, management, this is what we need to do to get there. And so now, as managers, we have a report card that tells us whether or not we've been successful. And when you can imagine if you're meeting on a monthly or quarterly basis as an association, as a board, and instead of the manager just reporting on the things that we accomplished this month or this quarter, now we're saying, hey, we have been able to, here's where we are on the progress of our key result on reducing AR. We are now 50% of the way to our goal on that key result. Now the board sees, hey, we're making progress, right? We're moving the needle when it comes to that item. And so I just wanted to give you a quick idea on what that looks like, but encourage you, and everybody has a different process or system for how you do that. But the big thing is just creating that list of objectives, those goals for the year. What do we want to do? How do we want to get there? And we'll help with the execution of that, right? But come together and figure out what do we want to do, right? And if that's always encourage boards to find some time to have these strategy sessions as a group to figure out, what do we want to accomplish? And then we've got our marching orders on how we get there. Question?
Yeah, does Goodwin by chance have any type of benchmarking on communities by age? Like if there's a community that's 5 years old, 10 years old, that could help us for our strategic goals? Because, as a community ages, there are certain things that need, infrastructure and things like that might go on that we need to address. So do you have any historical examples that we could draw on to try to develop a strategic plan?
The answer is yes and no. I mean, one of the common requests we get are, hey, tell us what our, benchmark our assessments against other communities of like size, age, amenities. The trouble is that no 2 communities are exactly alike. And so it becomes, a little subjective when it comes to that, but at least from a market standpoint, to be able to say, what does this look like and how do we compete? And, what are some of the things that we want to get ahead of based on your awareness of communities of the same, age? Yeah, I mean, there's certainly something to that. Oftentimes we find that there are communities that are built by the same builders, have very similar footprints, and we're able to learn from those experiences as well. What are issues that are happening and affecting either a certain market or projects that you're going to go into? How did you approach it? One of the things that I'm committed to doing this year, and I've been wanting to do for a while, but COVID kind of got in the way and people didn't want to meet, was bringing board members together from other communities and being able to sit around. I call them board member roundtables, but being able to sit around a table and say, hey, I've got something going on. And you'd be amazed at how other, fellow boards from other communities in the area are saying, I just went through that. We went through that a couple of years ago. Here's what we learned. Here's what we experienced. Here's the person to call for that type of project. They were fantastic, or stay away from them. It was a nightmare, right? So little things like that that I think we're now ready to kind of get back into and create and facilitate those opportunities. But yeah, if there's things that we can help with providing some some insight, let's talk more about that.
Then I have one other thing.
Yeah, sure.
So as an example, our community, in the city of Austin, we reside in the city of Austin, and our community doesn't have any sidewalks, public access sidewalks that you can cross to the other side of the street, which has sidewalks. However, the city of Austin also has a survey right now to determine by community, what can we do with this? So right now, we're unfortunately at the bottom, but we could drive that as a community. So how do you separate that, or is that a separate thing? Do we, as board members, do we try to engage the HOA to drive that project so it gets more visibility for the community?
I mean, it's certainly, I've seen communities masterfully rally. You basically, each of your communities represent a voting block, right? And getting the attention of local officials certainly helps. And one of the things that I don't always see enough of, but some of the larger communities have done a really nice job of, meet the candidates night or inviting, public officials in, and you'd be amazed at how eager they are to participate in those conversations, to hear what's going on and know that, hey, if I can help this community, it certainly puts me, in a good spot when it comes to election season, right? And so creating that dialogue, there are so many great resources available in many of the municipalities that we work in. There are programs that are available to community associations. We had Round Rock in not long ago, and they have a whole community resource team that helps with all kinds of programming for community associations. So there's a lot of good stuff out there that we can tap into. It's just being able to invite them in, right?
Yeah.
And I think now that we're getting to a point where we're starting to meet, whether that's in person or online, being able to engage those officials is important.
Yeah, and I'll just say I did invite our district representative, Councilman McKenzie,
Yeah.
and she did attend the HOA
Awesome.
annual meeting.
Yeah.
So I think it was a surprise to the community, but
That's
you
what
have to
it's all
make
about.
that bridge somewhere if you're
No
going to
doubt.
get drive projects within your city,
No doubt.
that help your own infrastructure.
It's a matter of the politics of trying to get up the list, right? Trying to figure out how to get there.
Somebody has to push the project.
No doubt. Great idea. Gary, can you move that? Almost done here. I'll go through this pretty quickly, but one of the things that, that I just wanted to highlight is always I got this from the CAI board member toolkit, which is a great little resource that's available through CAI. For those of you who have never heard of CAI, it's the Community Associations Institute, and it is basically the industry group that does everything from lobbying to represent the needs of community associations. They are a wealth of knowledge in terms of resources and best practices, but it's all about homeowner associations, right? All about community living. But one of the things that I always like to share is just kind of the qualities of a good board member, right? It's what are our intentions for joining the board? Oftentimes I find on my side of the table, you have folks who want to join the board because of a narrowly tailored interest, right? They have something that really piqued them, that compelled them to get on the board. They take care of that issue. They don't care about anything else going on. And then they jump off the board when they're done with that and move on. But when you think about why we're here and what we want to accomplish, it's so incredibly important to know that we are here to serve, and that we are here for a greater purpose. And even when things don't go our way on the board, this is a little democracy, right? And always try to encourage folks to see beyond, just the conflict that may arise when we're not on the same page about something, right? Respect others' viewpoints know that everybody's got a different way of looking at things, but ultimately we're all serving and hopefully and serving for the right reasons. So just my 2 cents on that. Derek, if you go ahead and move on a little further. For those of you who I think hopefully everybody understands their roles as a member of the board of directors. You've got your president who oversees operations. Typically the point of contact between management and the board. Oftentimes as manager, it can get really confusing when you've got 5 board members or 7 board members or 9 or 11 board members telling us, you know, sending us in different directions. So having someone who can take that, you know, and bring it down to, hey, this is what we're going to be focusing on. This is what we're going to be doing. It helps a lot. Vice president serves in the absence of the president, typically serves as a liaison between committees. Your secretary is the official keeper of the association's records. The treasurer is kind of the CFO of the association. And then different boards have different positions and different roles. And so there's directors at large, there's other aspects that may be more involved. But the one thing that I always like to highlight is that little quote on the side, and I heard it early in my career. And it was always from our side in terms of how you treat residents, you know, the difference between a resident and a president, it's just the B. It's just the P, right? I mean, ultimately, like we all are, you know, stakeholders in our community. And it's so important that we realize that, you know, while as a board member, you might have privilege to, you know, certain confidential information from time to time. Ultimately, we're all here, we're all equal stakeholders in the community. And so just a reminder that we should try at all cases to identify with everyone in the community, not just you know, not just as a board. In terms of just the role of management, I always like to just highlight what we're here for. For those of you who are new to your board, oftentimes, depending on the setup in the community, it can get a little confusing. We've got boards who want us to just handle the financials. I've got everything else, or handle everything. I've got a full-time job. Don't bother me with things. Just tell me when you need something, and everything in between. And so, you know, ideally, what we're here for is really, you know, just like a business has a CEO, right? And you've got your board of directors who serve to set the strategic objectives and make sure that the operation is moving forward. So too is management, right? Our manager should serve as kind of that pseudo CEO, right? Someone who's spearheading, you know, maintenance activities, making sure that we're keeping you out of trouble in terms of anything from a legal perspective or compliance perspective, working with legal counsel where needed, advising of regulatory issues and compliance requirements, coordinating member board communication, managing the association's finances. We've got a very large department here that handles every aspect of the financials, from your general ledger to accounts payable to receivable and everything in between. But someone who's reviewing those financials on a monthly basis and offering you some insight when we get together as a group to talk about whether we have the money to handle the project that we're looking at. Oversight and coordination of vendors and professionals, managing compliance with governing documents, all things that we do, and everything else, right? Homeowner relations, making sure that we're keeping up with the governance of the community and so on. And ideally, I always like to just kind of highlight the board management dynamic, right? You're the boss. Like, I always want to make sure that you understand that we are here to hear what your goals are and make sure that we execute on those. But the board is responsible for making decisions and setting policies, right? And trying to reach consensus on policy and direction. And we're here to carry that out, right? To implement the board's directives, to work with the board to fulfill the policies that you've set. And ultimately, we serve at the pleasure of the board to make sure that we don't want you to spend way too much time on this, even though some of us do. Really making sure that we are doing everything in our power to take that stuff off of you. And still, you know, again, you're the client, you're the one that is in charge, but we want to make that as easy as possible for you so you can actually enjoy the role. Financials. Wanted to just highlight that our financials are typically delivered on the 15th of each month. That's our goal. In the last couple months, we've had some minor issues and have been delivering closer to the 20th, and apologize for that. We onboarded a new payable system that has taken a couple months to implement, but I think we're right back on track from that standpoint. But those financials are delivered to the document section in Town Square. And again, you can review those financials right at month end, right on the first of the month. While they won't always be the reconciled financials, you'll have the ability to just know that there's between the 1st and the 15th and that delivery date. Those first 5 days, our team is looking at how the books closed and reviewing and making revisions to GL codes and doing everything they need to be doing from our standpoint to make sure that the financials are right before they're delivered. But you have an opportunity you can run for my treasurers out there, those who are really interested in kind of seeing transactions as they flow through the association. You have the ability of running a general ledger. You can export that into Excel too if you want to analyze it a little further. But the general ledger is a very important report because it just tells you every transaction, where it's been coded and what that looks like. So every expenditure, all your income, where that's classified to. That general ledger report is a pretty important report, and always available to you live in the board portal. Our financial package consists of 5 parts. So there are 5 PDFs. It's a financial statement, your accounts payable section, which includes all of your invoices that were paid for the period, the accounts receivable report, which tells you who's prepaid, who's past due, your general ledger, which again has the flow of all the transactions happening, and then your bank reconciliation, which includes your bank statements. And then we get started pretty early in the process for budget creation each year. If you're on a fiscal, if you're on a calendar year, which 99% of our communities are, we get started in August, if not sooner or later, depending on what your fiscal year is. But right around, really we start July, but right around August, we start getting into the nitty gritty of, analyzing the first 7 months of the association's finance and starting to draft what becomes multiple iterations of your budget before it gets to you for review and discussion and debate. And we bake that and get billing out for the coming year. So we try to wrap up the budget and billing process by our goal every year is to try to get billing out the door by Thanksgiving. So before Thanksgiving, that's kind of the deadline that we live and die by. All right, well, that does it for me. Again, my name's Mitch Kraus, and if you don't have my contact information, you'll receive it in the recap email that I send out. Please let me know if there's anything that you need to go over in a little more detail or discuss. Always happy to spend some time and get to know you and understand how we can help. Okay. Adam, thank you.
Thank you,
Sorry
sir.
it took so long.
So I understand the clicker is no longer
Okay.
working. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Adam Pugh. I'm going to talk to you today about board members' roles and responsibilities. We call it the 6 C's, and we'll get into that in a moment. This can be a little bit dry, so if anybody has questions or if the topics that we're discussing remind you of something you'd like to talk about, go ahead and jump in. If you're watching online, go ahead and type in your questions. I think those will pop up for Mitch, and either if they're very interesting, he might interrupt me in the middle, but we'll certainly have some time later on at the end to ask questions. So here we go. There's a picture of me before I had quite as much as experience. And great. And there's a little bit about my background. This is a little cartoon that we like to include. It's the board sitting around the table, and they say, what if we don't change it all and something magical just happens? The idea is not to get complacent. Listen to your community, pay attention to what's going on, and above all, try to exercise common sense. Now, almost all Texas community associations are going to be managed by a board of directors. The board of directors is generally responsible for setting the goals, as Mitch discussed, the standards and policies for the association. You're responsible for enforcing the governing documents, maintaining the common areas, and entering into contracts for services on behalf of the community. Let's go to the next one.
Oh, sorry. Go
That's right.
go for it now.
Okay, now in order to carry out your roles and your responsibilities, board members should know the 6 C's. Those are contract, corporation, compliance, collections, covenants, and community. And we'll start with contract. So a community association is a private organization. It is established by a written contract, generally referred to as the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, or more simply, the Declaration. It can also be a condominium association. It's generally made up of property owners that we call a common interest development, and it's vested with the management and maintenance of the community and its amenities or the commonly owned property. You may have heard the term fiduciary duty. That's what you owe your association. Now, a declaration is recorded by the original developer, also referred to as the declarant, in the official public records of whatever county you're located in. The declaration runs with the land, and what that means is these are restrictions that follow the property, no matter who it's passed to, regardless of whether the new property owner signs a document saying they've acknowledged it. If you purchase property in the association, you're bound by the declaration. Now, the declaration constitutes a private contractual agreement, and it imposes certain contractual obligations upon the owners of all the property that's subject to the declaration. Courts in Texas interpret declarations exactly like contracts. So contract law applies to how we interpret and view declarations. There are 3 categories of contractual obligations that you'll find in your declaration. You've got the obligation of mandatory membership in the community association. You've got the obligation to pay assessments levied by the community association. That triggers your duties under Chapter 209 of the Texas Property Code. And then you've got the obligation to comply with applicable land use restrictions. So these are building restrictions, what you can build, what kinds of improvements you can put on the property, and then how can you use that property once you've constructed whatever those improvements are. The declaration is the most important of the community association's governing documents, but as you know, it's not the only one. The provisions of the declaration will generally trump any conflicting provisions in any of the other governing documents. So the declaration sits right up at the top. So that is the first C. The second C is corporation. Here's where we'll talk about a few more of the documents that govern your association. Now, almost all Texas community associations are incorporated as Texas nonprofit associations. There are some exceptions with pre-1994 condominiums that are unincorporated nonprofit associations, but you're starting to see less and less of those. Even those pre-1994 condos are starting to incorporate because they get some benefits by doing that. Now, a Texas nonprofit corporation is governed by its corporate governing documents. You've got the certificate of formation, which used to be referred to as the Articles of Incorporation. When the Texas Business Organizations Code codified the old O'Connor's statutes, we started calling it the Certificate of Formation. And then you've also got the bylaws. The certificate of formation is sort of like the birth certificate of the association. It will have the date on which it was formed, and then it has the name of the nonprofit, the purpose for which it was formed, and whether or not the corporation is to be managed by a board of directors or by its members. In almost all situations, you're going to be managed by a board of directors. I think out of about 12 or 1,300 HOAs that we manage, we have 2 that don't have a board of directors. So it's pretty rare to not have a board of directors. Hold on, that's all right. There you go. All right. Now, the bylaws generally provide procedures for electing and removing directors and officers. It tells you the number of directors and officers and what their terms of office will be, the time, place, and procedures for calling regular and special board meetings, the time, place, and procedures for annual and special membership meetings, and the procedures for the amendment of the bylaws themselves. All right, compliance. This is a third C. All community associations should be managed in compliance with their declaration, the corporate governing documents, and applicable statutory laws. So there's a little bit to keep up with. One of those areas of the law is Texas nonprofit corporation law. This is codified as Chapter 22 of the Texas Business Organizations Code, and it applies to all community associations that are incorporated. We refer to this as a gap filler statute because it provides default rules in the event that there's an issue that is not addressed in your governing documents. So for instance, sometimes the bylaws don't have a provision for how to amend the bylaws. You can go to chapter 22 and find out that a majority of the board of directors can actually always amend the bylaws of the nonprofit in the state of Texas, unless there's a provision in the bylaws or actually the articles of incorporation that are contrary to that statute.
I had one earlier this week that I talked to Greg about
When does a mailing for a vote, when does it count as being sent? And it's when it gets deposited in the post office. Well, that isn't present in any of the other statutes, and it is prominently done so in the nonprofit corporation law. So very, very handy.
Yeah, it's good to have that, and it's good to know that just because someone didn't receive
Right.
the notice, as long as you put it in the mail,
Yep.
you've done your duty. All right, so then we've got
And real quick, there was a question that came in I
Sure.
wanted to speak to. What about if my association has mandatory and non-mandatory members, like an opt-in, opt-out type deal? How is that? How does that work in the grand scheme of what we're talking about?
Well, you see that from time to time. If there are any mandatory members at all, then you're governed by chapter 209 of the Texas Property Code. If you're a fully volunteer association, then chapter 209 doesn't. We have a couple of those that we manage. Dues are not mandatory, membership is not mandatory, and it's just really a community association of volunteers and volunteer members. And so you just have to look and see what the governing documents specify. This kind of a hybrid association can have all kinds of different duties back and forth, but certainly if people are choosing not to be members, then there's not much you can do to bring them into the fold. Now, if you are on the board of directors of a community association, then you need to understand the statutes that apply. We've got chapters 81 and 82 of the Texas Property Code, and these apply only to condominium associations. 81 and 80 and part of 82 apply to pre-1994 condominium associations. Chapter 82 applies to post-1993 condominium associations. Now, 81 and 82 are very different than chapter 209. These are empowerment statutes. 81 and 82 actually grant powers to homeowners associations, even if those powers don't appear in the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, or the declaration. There are powers that can exist solely in statutes that can be exercised by your board of directors. This is contrary to chapter 209 that governs subdivision only associations. It limits the powers that you can have. So your declaration or your bylaws might give you certain powers in a subdivision association, and chapter 209 comes along and just takes those away. In chapter 81 and 82, there are very few regulatory provisions. So there's very few limiting statutes within those chapters. Mostly it just gives power to the condominium association.
Gotcha. Go for it.
Now, talking about chapter 209 of the Texas Property Code, this only applies to subdivision associations. It's known as the Texas Residential Property Owners Protection Act. It is a regulatory statute, and it trumps any conflicting provisions in the declaration or corporate governing documents. All right, now let's talk about collections. One of the topics that is probably the least fun to talk about as a board member are collections. Texas community associations provide essential services to your communities, and in fact, your association was saddled with all kinds of duties before you ever showed up. The developer of your community made certain promises to municipalities and counties that they would take care of certain areas in a particular way. And you are on the board of the association that is charged in perpetuity with upholding those duties. And so the members of the community have to pay for that. And the lifeblood of the community are those assessments. So it's important that you take collecting those assessments seriously. Now, almost all community associations are authorized to levy mandatory assessments on their members, and the authority to levy assessments must be established by statute and or declaration. Now, in chapter 81 and 82, it establishes that you have a lien in a condominium association automatically by virtue of just being a condominium association. In a subdivision association, the declaration itself must state that you have a continuing lien on the property in order for you to have a lien. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Now, a community association's declaration will generally establish the types of and procedures for levying assessments. So you've got regular assessments, special assessments. Over the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen some other categories pop up, like specific assessments that some drafters of these declarations have tried to suggest fines can be levied as assessments. And the declaration is going to provide that the obligation to pay assessments that are levied is both a personal obligation of the property owner, and it also establishes a lien against the property in favor of the association. For condos, a lien in favor of the association is established by Chapter 82. Now, when property owners fail to pay their assessments, the community association must generally engage in collection efforts in order to recover those unpaid assessments. This can include demand letters being sent by the association, by the management company, by your attorney. This includes recording notices of the association's lien in the official public records. And then, of course, in the smallest of percentages, as a last-ditch effort, you can also foreclose on these liens. And this is something we handle on behalf of all of our clients.
Adam, I got a great question
Sure.
from Jim on the call. Is there any best practice on when to actually, what's that balance, magic number balance, when you start to really take action, when we turn over, that collections matter to our attorneys?
Sure. That's a great question. It's one I get all the time, and it's a balancing act. Our first and foremost, our goal when we get a collection account is not necessarily to go and be aggressive and get it all at once. A lot of the collection process is education. I've gotten all kinds of calls from homeowners, and the typical excuses are, what HOA? I didn't join your association, or they say, well, I never signed anything, and so I don't owe this, or my realtor never told me I was going to have to pay this. And you have to explain to them what the association does, why it exists, and what they get for the money that apparently they forgot to pay for quite some time. What we're always trying to do is solve a problem. If your dues are $25 a month and someone's got a $10,000 balance, we've got a pretty big problem. And if you let the problem get out of hand, and some boards really don't want to do collections, they just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to foreclose on their neighbors. They don't want to be the big bad guys. And so you see in those instances balances that get really, really high. The old board goes away, the new board comes in and goes, we've got these 5 people and they all owe 10 years of assessments. What are we going to do? Well, at that point, ignoring for a moment the 4-year statute of limitations, you have an unsolvable problem. And you're either going to foreclose on that person, which nobody wants to do, or you're going to enter into some kind of payment plan that's going to go forever, and is going to be set up to fail. And so my advice is to act to collect the amounts as quickly as you can. That doesn't necessarily mean jump to foreclosure right away. If you're being managed by Goodwin, they have a fantastic in-house collection program that you can utilize, where they're sending out notices. They're asking people to call the customer service department and entering into payment plans on your behalf. But sometimes that doesn't work. And you've got to step up the efforts a little bit to get people's attention and get them on a payment plan that's actually going to work. That's where we come in. If somebody owes more than 6 months of assessments, it's probably time to send them to the attorney's office. I would suggest something like 90 days is really when you want to jump on these problems. The collection process can take a while to get going. And so if you've got somebody that owes 6 months of assessments, we can get them on a payment plan. They can pay their regular assessments plus an extra month for 6 months and get caught up. That's not that hard to do. But when you start to see these balances that get in the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 range, that's not going to be something that everybody can take care of in a 6-month period. And in my experience, as you extend payment plans out much past 6 months, if you go 12 months or over, the percentages of failure of those plans skyrockets. And so you want to try to get these matters to your attorney as fast as you can. That doesn't mean we're going to go foreclose over $75, but the sooner you can start sending demand letters and getting people's attention, the sooner you can fix the problem and the easier the problem is to fix.
You mentioned this 4-year statute of limitations. What does that mean?
Sure, it's a great question. So in Texas, there is a 4-year statute of limitations on any debt. As you know, your assessments are accruing periodically. Maybe they're monthly, maybe they're quarterly, maybe they're annually. But what the statute of limitations means is that if you're going to enforce your right to collect, if you're going to file a lawsuit to foreclose, if you're going to act to collect these amounts, you have to file your lawsuit within 4 years of the date the assessment accrued. So if you've got somebody, for instance, that owes 4 years of assessments and the assessments are due on the 1st of January, and they owe 4 years, and it's now the middle of 2022, you probably can't collect that assessment from 4 years ago because it became due prior to 4 years from today. So to say it a different and a simpler way, if today is April 28th, 2022, you can't collect a debt that accrued prior to April 28th, 2018. And that's what you have to keep in mind. And so if that comes to our office, we're just going to immediately write off all of that debt. And it's probably something you ought to do too. And if you're looking at your books and you've got debt on there that's even close to 4 years old, I would just respectfully suggest you're doing something wrong, because letting it go for that long is certainly in that realm of unsolvable problems. So I would suggest that 6 months to a year is the outside limit for when you should start sending collection matters to your attorney.
So the whole idea of foreclosing, and you mentioned it earlier, but most folks say we don't want to get involved in that. We don't want to take possession of somebody's home. Right? Why is foreclosure such an important aspect of the remedies available to us?
It's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I throw around the term foreclosure like it's no big deal, and it isn't. It's very serious. It's a serious matter when you suggest to somebody you're going to take their house. But the good news is we almost never do it. It's such a valuable tool, and it's such a large hammer that you almost never have to actually use it. When you explain to somebody and they actually realize that if I don't pay this $2,500 bill, you're going to actually sell my house, it spurs them into action, and we start solving problems. That threat works. The bigger the threat, the smaller the amount, and the more leverage you're going to have. Certainly, there are some people that get themselves into situations where they couldn't afford the house in the first place, much less the association dues. And so they stop paying the mortgage and they stop paying the assessments, and your threat to foreclose isn't any bigger than the one they've already gotten from the mortgage company. But it's a very good tool to explain that, look, these amounts are due, they're owing. Everybody else in the neighborhood, or at least a large percentage, are paying on time, every time, and without demand. And it's just unfair to the rest of the community to let a certain small percentage get away with not paying. And so that's why that threat is there. And that's why it works so well. And it's why we almost never have to actually follow through, because it's such a serious threat.
Now, just that as a point of clarity, just for a question that we got. So the idea is not that we're waiting a year to initiate collections. Essentially, we're sending out notices and going through the process of filing a lien and escalating that collections matter until it gets to a point where it needs to be dealt with from a legal perspective. But I wanted to make it clear, we don't start the process in a year. Also, depending on the amount of the assessment, it may not be prudent to start, at 12 months from the date that the collection is due. Does the balance play into that in terms of, like, let's say it's a $70, $50 a year assessment. Somebody hasn't paid in a year. We're not expecting to take them to, into foreclosure proceedings, but at what point is there a magic number in terms of a balance, and when we should say, hey, Adam, please help get involved here and let's make this.
There's really not a magic number of a balance. But your point's well taken. If it's $50 or $75 annually, is it really worth the expense of going and spending money to file a foreclosure action? Probably not. All I can say though is, if it's $50 a year, the most they're ever gonna owe you is $200 because it's gonna fall off. An association with $50 annual dues probably also doesn't have a very large budget, and those amounts probably aren't gonna mean as much. If you've got $500, $600, $1,000 annual dues, now we start to really see where the rubber meets the road, and we really need to go and collect those amounts so that the association can function at all. I wish I could just give you a magic number. If it's $425, send it over to my office. If it's $424, hang on to it, but you can't.
Right. The other question that came through that is, I think, a good one, was once a lien is filed, does the statute of limitations still apply?
That's a great question. The lien does not freeze the statute of limitations. And to be clear, and we're getting a little bit into more of the collection stuff, and I'm happy to do it, but filing a notice of assessment lien is just a document that says you have a delinquency that you owe. The declaration, which is filed prior to anybody actually taking title to their property, creates a lien. And so the homeowners association has a lien on everybody's property. So this idea that you're filing a lien on somebody's property, we use that term even in my office, but what we mean is we're filing a notice of a delinquent assessment lien, because that just puts title companies and prospective purchasers on notice that they're buying a piece of property that already has a debt on it.
Now, can I assume somebody didn't pay their assessments for 10 years? When they go sell their home, they're gonna make the association whole? Or do they have a case to say, hey, statute of limitations?
They can certainly raise the statute of limitations at that time. And so it's a little bit tricky. There's a new regulation that was just passed recently. It's Regulation F, that's governed by the Consumer Protection Board at the federal level. It used to be that we would go ahead and file lawsuits, even if somebody owed 10 years of assessments, knowing that there's a 4-year statute of limitations, because in Texas, statute of limitations is an affirmative defense. The defendant has to raise it. If the defendant doesn't raise it, doesn't know to raise it, you can go ahead and get a judgment against them for all the amount of money that they actually owe the association. On that same note, when you go to sell a house and you ask, or the title company asks the management company to produce a resale certificate, the management company is going to put every dollar that's ever been due to the association on that resale certificate. I would suggest that you can't do that anymore, and that amounts over 4 years from the date of the resale certificate should probably be written off pursuant to Regulation F, because there's now this provision that says that if you attempt to collect time-barred amounts, you can be in violation of federal law. So it's important that we act within that 4-year statute of limitations to collect those amounts, or it goes away forever, and you're never going to collect that money because you can't do it legally. Yes, sir.
So it still doesn't, you can file, but what's to keep them from not paying? They know that there's a statute of limitations of 4 years. In our neighborhood, someone's owed up to $4,000 on HOA dues, right? So if they know this and you filed on them and they know there's the statute of limitations, then how do you collect on it if they know they can get out of it after 4 years?
There's one thing you can do to slam the brakes on the statute of limitations. And that's file a lawsuit. The day you file a lawsuit, everything that you were legally able to claim is due and owing. So if we filed it today, we could go all the way back to April 28, 2018. And so everything from April 28, 2018 forward is now due and owing by that owner, and the clock stops running. So now you can go through the process, you can enter into payment agreements, you can litigate with them, you can have motions for summary judgment and everything else, and the clock has stopped running.
So the lien, because it sounds like filing the lien doesn't really have any teeth to it. If it's been beyond those 4 years.
Well, you can't, you shouldn't file a lien for amounts that are more than 4 years. That's a collection action.
If you filed the lien, even within the 4 years,
Right.
and they haven't paid after the 4 years, they can still come and say, look, sorry, statute of limitations is 4 years. I don't have to pay for this now. So it doesn't sound like there's really any teeth in filing the lien. There is teeth in filing the lawsuit.
Right.
Right?
Well, yes, I mean, filing a lien is still a good tool. It's not meant to stop the statute of limitations. It's meant to put people on notice that there is this debt that's out there. It affects the title. Prospective owners are prospective purchasers will find it. Title companies will see it. But no, if you are worried about the statute of limitations, you have one solution, and that's file a lawsuit.
So if you file on April 27th for the past 4 years. That's right, that stops.
It stops running. So then it could take 2 years to litigate the
Right,
case,
yeah.
but you've frozen in time the amount that they owe. And now as it accrues, they continue to accrue the debt to the association.
But there, if that lien is filed and they go to sell their house, they can still sell their house without having to pay those back homeowner dues.
Maybe, honestly, it doesn't happen that often that an owner says, hey, what about the statute of limitations? Most of the time, the HOA lien is kind of an afterthought. The title company looks at the resale certificate, puts it on what we used to call the HUD-1, it's now a closing disclosure, and they just pay it because they knew they owed the money.
So they'll pay it.
So
If they want to sell their house, they'll pay it.
it frequently gets paid.
Okay.
And we rarely have oh, by the way, this is past the statute of limitations, conversation. I have it maybe once or twice a year with the title company, and we're handling thousands and thousands of collection matters. So it's important that you know this. It's important that you don't wait longer than 4 years. But I can just tell you from a practical standpoint, it rarely gets raised. It's just now important because of Regulation F that we not try to collect amounts that are time barred. All right. So collection actions by a Texas Community Association are governed by its declaration, the Texas Debt Collection Practices Act, and the Texas Property Code. It's also governed by the Federal Debt Collection Practices Act and now Regulation F. Collection actions by a Texas Community Association may also be affected by certain conditions or events, including if the property is the owner's homestead, if the owner is an active duty military service member, or if the owner files bankruptcy. All right, now covenants. Restrictive covenants, or just covenants, regulate the use of a lot or unit owner by its owner. Covenants are intended to preserve and protect property values in a community and owners' peaceful enjoyment of their property. Covenants can generally be described as either mandatory covenants. These impose an obligation on you to do something like maintain your landscaping. And there's prohibitory covenants. These impose an obligation to refrain from doing something, like parking a boat in a driveway or allowing your dog to bark all the time. You know, I need new batteries. I don't know. The enforcement of covenants can be by both non-judicial and judicial procedures. So non-judicial procedures have to be authorized by your documents, and they can include self-help remedies. A lot of times you refer to that as a force mow, or oh, what happened there? Sorry, that's all right.
Every time I type it kicks it back.
Let's see, where are we? Okay, so you got self-help remedies, and then you can also assess fines. Now, fines are a sticky topic. If your declaration does not indicate that you can charge your owners fines for violating the restricted covenants, then you simply can't do it. In condos, it's a little bit different. And Chapter 82 does authorize fines to be levied, even if it's not in your documents. But if you are a subdivision association and your documents do not authorize fines, you can't do it. The question I get a lot after I say that is, well, our declaration says that we're allowed to implement and enforce rules. And there were a number of lawyers for a while telling us that, well, how else are you going to enforce a rule in a homeowners association unless you're going to fine people? And it turns out the courts have said, no, that's not how that works. And that's the advice we've been giving for years and years now is that if you want to fine, it's not in your documents, you need to amend your documents. It might be the best piece of advice that I've given so far today. Yes, sir.
What percentage for housing developments have that covenant in there where they can levy fines? Is it common or is it uncommon?
It's common. I'd say in the 2/3 to 75% do have the ability to levy fines. If I was guessing, I could be off by 5% one way or the other, but I think it's probably in the 2/3 to 75%. range, and it really is the best tool you've got. And it's not because you should use fines to collect a bunch of money so you can go and improve the park. In fact, my goal for an association would be to waive every single fine you ever enforce. And this is how it ought to work. You send somebody a notice, you say, hey, here's your one warning. You need to mow your yard. They don't do it. And then 30 days later, you send them a letter, you say, you didn't mow your yard, here's a $50 fine. They call you the next day and they say, my mower was broken, I'm gonna do it tomorrow. And you say, that's great, if you do it tomorrow, I'm gonna waive that fine. That's how it ought to work. Fines are meant to be a way to convince people to do the right thing. It's not a way to collect money. And I have this conversation probably 30 times a year with boards of directors that, oh, this guy owes $3,500 in fines, and that's going to be great because we can go get all that money. My goal would be to get the guy to fix the problem, and then we waive all those fines. Certainly, there are certain people that probably have earned some fines that might even deserve it, but that really, being punitive isn't the goal of the association. It's just to gain compliance. And so with that in mind, fines could be a very, very good tool, but your goal should be to never actually collect them.
If
You
the
never really
covenant,
can collect them, can you?
Well, sure you can. Oh, you can collect
Legally?
fines. Oh, yeah. In most situations, fines are also secured by the lien on the property. And you can actually, if they owe $1 in assessments and $10,000 in fines, you can collect $10,001. And you can foreclose on it for that reason. You can sue people to get a judgment. You can enforce the fine against them. You can get an injunction that says they have to fix the thing plus pay you all your fines. And under Chapter 202.004C of the Texas Property Code, if you do have to sue somebody to enforce your restrictive covenants, you can get up to $200 a day as a civil penalty. So fines are collectible. I'm just suggesting that you don't need to collect them to have them serve the purpose and get people to do what they're supposed to.
can just go quick questions.
Sure.
Can the fines, if let's say the covenants will speak specifically to the fine amounts, can the board set those in kind of rules and regulations?
Yeah, usually what you see in a declaration is a list of enumerated powers that the board of directors has. And one of those will be to set and levy fines. I always recommend that even if you have this general power to fine and it just says at the discretion of the board, whatever they think is a great idea, that the board should implement a fine policy. I think it puts people on notice. I think it's a nice thing to do. I think if you plan to fine people $25 or $50 for not mowing their yard, you ought to have that document existing. It ought to be filed in the public records. It ought to be on your website where they can see it and know what the schedule is in the event they violate those rules.
Adam, real quick, other remedies, if there are, let's say that an association doesn't have the power to fine, can they shut off access to amenities, things of that nature?
Potentially, in virtually all associations, the ability to exclude delinquent members from access to the common areas is in there. I've almost never seen a set of restrictive covenants that doesn't allow for the board to limit access to the common areas. Every once in a while you see them, but they're from 1965. So most HOAs have been created since then, and you don't see that kind of language anymore. But yeah, you can restrict access to the amenity center. You can threaten to file a lawsuit, and then you can of course file a lawsuit if it's serious enough. If you got a guy parking an 18-wheeler on his neighbor's front yard, stuff like that, then yeah, we'll come in, we'll file a lawsuit. We can, if it's an emergency, we can get a temporary restraining order. If it's not quite that important, we can get a temporary injunction. And if it's a simple solution, then we can just wait and get a permanent injunction eventually. Yes, sir.
Last question, I promise. but
No.
this is- I knew on my board, and one of the areas of contention was about maintaining the lawns. However, where it gets tricky is the resident is not the homeowner. So who do these letters go to?
That's
Do they-
often times where you find those problems is
Right.
somebody isn't living there. They own it, but the tenant isn't taking the same care. So we direct it to the owner. So the owner is the one that should be getting the correspondence. Now, whether the owner is updating their mailing address is a different story, but the owner is still responsible ultimately for the tenant. So the tenant really doesn't care what's going on, that the owner has to, enforce that on the tenant through that lease that they have.
So that's the way I understood it.
Yeah.
And for me, a simple thing to do was, well, if the homeowner doesn't know he's not in compliance, how does he know to fix the
Well,
problem?
they receive an email and a letter
From,
from us.
so they do, the
Yes.
resident does.
No, the tenant, the
But
owner.
if the resident doesn't know he's not in compliance,
We typically don't do business with the tenant though. So the owner is the one responsible for the home. And then they can enforce whatever, I mean, ultimately, if it's completely out of control, they better find this, what's going on. And oftentimes we gotta like get on the phone and call the owner and say, hey, are you getting this? When grass is growing 10 feet tall, it's usually the only remedy is to say, it's obvious you're not getting, you're not
it
getting our
just seems
messages
like
here.
it'd be
What's going on?
easier if you cut to the chase and the letter goes directly to the property, because they own, whether the resident owns the property or not, that's still the address. And if the letter goes there, then they'll know.
Depending on the community, though, sometimes we don't know if there's a tenant in place or not, right?
Well,
Unless there's a
and
policy
legally-
around.
Legally, your relationship is between the owner of the property and the association. From a practical standpoint, when it comes to my office, a lot of times we're posting notices on front doors with duct tape and making sure that they get it.
Whether it's an owner, property owner or not.
Whether it's a property owner or not. And so if it's a serious issue, this is gonna sound funny, but we had one recently where somebody had a goat tied to the tree in the front yard, okay? Hey, you can't make that stuff up. And he was doing a really good job of trimming the grass in a circle around that tree, but not so much outside that circle. And so it was important to let the owner know. We knew that the property owner's address was something, the zip code didn't start 787, and it was somewhere in a different state. And so we knew that the person living there with the goat was not the owner of the property. And so we made contact with the tenant to try to get it resolved and to make sure that the owner was actually getting the information. But your point's well taken. It's just when we're talking about minor issues like pull your trash cans in, mow your yard, you're just gonna send letters to the owner, and you're gonna hope that the owner filters those to the tenant, because ultimately the owner's responsible to the association for any of those fines and any of the other damages. It is good to know, though, that in most of the standard lease forms that people use for residential leases in Texas, whether it's TRAC or the TAR forms, there are provisions in most of those that allow the landlord to charge the tenant for any of those fines. So they can pass it on if they're enforcing their own rights. But again, you can't make people enforce their rights, but you can point out to them that if they've used a standard lease, they've probably got the ability to charge that tenant for that cost.
Thank you.
Foreclosure, a remedy when it comes to assessment fines? Let's say somebody just they don't owe assessments, they owe $10,000 in fines. How do I do
No,
that?
if you don't at least owe $1 in assessments, you can't threaten or foreclose.
So what's my remedy?
So depending on if it's an ongoing condition that we want to have fixed, the remedy is to sue in either county court at law or district court and ask for an injunction. And an injunction is just an order from a judge that says, you better go fix it or you're going to be in contempt of court. Almost never do people actually get the order that says, if you don't do this, you'll be in contempt of court, but you can go to jail. And judges, I'll tell you this, when we walk into court and we say, hi, my name's Adam Pugh and I represent this homeowners association, it's going to be an uphill battle that day. Judges don't love you guys. They just don't. And there's a lot of homeowners associations out there that have been run by board members that weren't as diligent as you all are. They didn't show up at classes. They weren't trying to do the right thing. They weren't listening to the 6 C's and exercising common sense. And they did things that were overbearing and that really left a bad taste in a lot of judges' mouths. And for better or for worse, that's what we're dealing with when we walk into court. But when the judge finally gets to the point where they say, okay, this is a bad enough problem and you better not do it anymore, and I'm ordering you not to do it, and that person then violates that judge's order, well, now it's not the HOA that they're upset with, it's that guy right there. And I've seen judges throw people in jail. A guy got to spend the night in the Travis County jail because he refused to mow his yard. And, you know, he proved his point by being as obstinate as possible. But that's the, you know, that's kind of the ultimate thing that could ultimately happen. But it's very rare for something like that to happen. But that's, to answer your question, you can get an injunction, you can have people found to be in contempt of court. And if they don't follow the rules, they can go to jail. All right. Now, then you've also got judicial enforcement. We talked about this a little bit. You file a lawsuit against the offending property owner for breach of their contractual obligation to comply with the covenant, and you seek specific performance of their obligations to comply with the covenant by issuing an injunction. And contempt is the way you enforce an injunction if somebody fails to abide by the judge's order.
Oh, hold on. Just, go for it.
Click and click.
Oh, hold on. Sorry.
The third. All right, judicial enforcement is also subject to the affirmative defense of statute of limitations and abandonment and waiver. And so what this really means, and for some reason, it always comes up with sheds. We're always wanting to tell people they can't have sheds, and everybody apparently wants a shed. And it really pops up when somebody comes and says, okay, this guy just put up this shed. And the first question I say is, how many sheds are there in the neighborhood? And they go, oh, well, gosh, you know, almost everybody's got a shed. We just want to stop letting people have them. And the problem with that is that if somebody has had an offensive structure, meaning a structure that violates the restrictive covenants in some ways for more than 4 years, and you knew they had it, it wasn't hidden in their backyard or covered by a tree or something like that, then you have to act within 4 years on a restrictive covenant, just like you have to on a debt. And so if somebody's had the shed for longer than 4 years, we're not going to be able to do anything about it. You've waived the right to enforce that. And the problem with that then is, well, how many other people have these sheds that we've waived the right to enforce? And the Supreme Court has told us that if there are about 10% or more of the people in a neighborhood violating one particular restrictive covenant, you run the risk of having waived it. The idea is that if you drive around a neighborhood and look around and you don't even have a copy of the declaration, you should be able to get a feel for what's okay and what's not okay. And if more than 10% of the population has a particular item, somebody driving around would probably be led to believe that that's just fine. And that's the way waiver works. So you've got to be real careful about the way you enforce these restrictive covenants. And if you care about a particular right, like sheds, you know, jump on it immediately. Don't let somebody have a structure that's in violation of restrictive covenants for any longer than you absolutely have to, so that you don't run the risk of waiving that restriction.
I have a question on that. Actually, our communities encountering the issue with sheds right now. Neighbor did it, now the next door neighbor's putting up. We've sent notice regarding the violation. Asked for cease and desist as well to be done. It is within 10 feet of the property line, which is against county code. I know that as a code officer's wife. So they continue to ignore, right? And they're going to continue moving forward. Is in that instance, the person that reports it to us is a board. I mean, response, obviously, county's going to immediately go and do notice on that. Does it make sense for us to reach out to Goodwin to ask them to call county and put in that notice? Is it homeowner, the person that reported it? What's the recommendation that you guys have in that type of instance? If it's a noticeable violation, when we know it's in violation of county code?
I mean, you're well within your rights to report to the code enforcement violations. I mean, all code enforcement from the city to the county and everything else operates on the tattletale system.
Right.
I mean, there's so few code enforcement officers, and they're not driving around looking for violations.
Oh.
Although sometimes,
Trust me, I hear those stories every day.
That's what I was gonna say. And so, you know, go ahead and report it, but I wouldn't rely upon the county or the city in every situation to handle the enforcement of your restrictive covenants for you.
Exactly, and that's not what we're, right,
Sure.
because they're ignoring us anyways, maybe if
Right.
they hear it from someone else.
Yeah, and if they do
too.
ignore you, you can elevate this to the level of filing a lawsuit, preserving your rights. And then you just have to make sure you're being consistent. And so if you're telling these two guys, hey, you two neighbors, you can't have sheds, you probably need to broaden your search, drive around the neighborhood,
Yeah.
see who else has sheds that are in violation. Because every time I ever file a lawsuit that says you better remove your shed, the response is, well, that's selective enforcement. There's 11 other sheds in the neighborhood, and I'll send you the pictures right now. So you have to be in the process of enforcing restrictive covenants against everybody in the neighborhood equally. Otherwise, you can run the risk of selective enforcement being a valid.
Yeah,
defense.
and that's, so I've been on for 1 month now. So that's one thing, but I think tonight too, our challenge is we have a community of 1,200 homes and we have an ACC committee of 2. So I think that's where the education for tonight, that there is that team here that can help us with that. It is something I can take back to our.
Certainly, and then I'm imagining that with Goodwin handling the management, you probably have violation drives too, or
We do.
maybe 4 times a month even. And those folks will work with you. If you have a specific violation that you really want them to focus on, you can give them those instructions and they'll look for those things. Obviously, they're going to be looking for the obvious things. And if there's 1,200 homes, they're not going to get out the binoculars and stare into the backyard of every single owner, but they can focus on certain things. And if you've got a big problem like sheds or whatever else it might be, you can advise them to keep an eye out for a particular violation, gather them all up in one place, and then you can work on enforcing them as you go. But no, I imagine it's a pretty big challenge for 2 ACC members and 1,200 homes just to keep up with the applications coming in that have to be approved and denied. All right, so now both non-judicial and judicial enforcement procedures are subject to certain due process requirements before a community association can either assess a fine, charge a property owner for damages that they've caused to the common areas, file a judicial enforcement lawsuit, this is a subdivision community only, or suspend a property owner's right to use a common area, and that's in a subdivision only. You have to send certain notices, you have to give them the time to cure that violation before you can take any kind of corrective action. Now, the final C is community, and a community association combines the characteristics of a local government, a business, and a community. And a strong sense of community among residents and clear lines of communication are essential to creating community spirit, encouraging active participation by residents in the association, and building vibrant, responsive, and healthy communities. And this really, this should be one of your utmost goals, is to bring people together and not come in and, sometimes it is important to come in and be the new sheriff in town and set things right. But building a sense of community is really important and should be something that you strive to do. Yes, ma'am.
So from a volunteer perspective, just give a little thing. So
Sure.
we used to teach our first community classes. We taught community, and one of the things we educate our children on is that there's a you and I in every community.
Exactly. And I think keeping in mind, like Mitch said at the beginning, that, you might be on the board, you might even be the president, but everybody is on equal footing and you all really have the same goals. It's to preserve the property values for everybody, because that's in everybody's benefit. And you don't want to drive into the community when you get home from work and think, oh, great, here goes the big, whatever the big dispute on Facebook is that week, whether it's the people that leave the dog poop in the bag on their walk and don't throw it away, or maybe the complaint is about the people that do throw it away, but in someone else's trash can. We get that in my neighborhood all the time. So board members should always promote a high level of community involvement in terms of voting, meeting attendance, and volunteerism. Ask for volunteers. One of my favorite things to do when I'm invited to meetings of members or board meetings, there's always somebody that wants to stand up and complain about something. And a lot of times it's, the flowers in the median, Well, one of my favorite meetings I was ever at, guy stands up, complains about the flowers and the color, and they're being planted at the wrong times. And don't you people know that you can't plant peonies in July or whatever it was? Maybe that is when you plant peonies. But anyway, I said, you know what? You now are the chairman of the landscape committee. Thank you for your service. And after the meeting, we'll get everybody else to have a show of hands of anybody else that wants to serve on that committee. We had 3 or 4 people raise their hands, and I went to go do something else, and that guy had bolted out of the back door. So one of the best ways to deal with people that complain in the community is get them involved. If they've got all that energy that they want to contribute to complaining in meetings, man, give them an outlet for that energy and put them on a committee. Promote transparency in the operation of the association and promote resolution of disputes and issues in a neighborly manner. Sometimes, without a better way of saying it, sometimes we have to be the adults, and it's time to remind people that they ought to be adults too. And as leaders in the community, that's certainly something that you can contribute. Well, thank you very much for attending. I really appreciate you being involved and caring enough to try to learn more to be a good board member. I've got my contact information up here. If you ever have questions, let me know. Mitch has left for a minute, but if any of you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Yes, ma'am.
This may have already come to Goodwin earlier from our board, but we have a house that is not occupied, hasn't been for I don't know how many years, in disrepair. Apparently the neighbor next to him, our president, said you can almost stick your finger through the wall. So does that fall under, you said, I guess, a bet that we could sue for? What would we do about this?
Well, you need to try to get a hold of the owner. In a situation like that, if somebody's let a home, so badly deteriorate in a nice neighborhood where they could at least be renting this thing out and generating some revenue that way, it suggests a pretty serious
I
problem.
think he's been ignored.
Yeah,
He's contacted the homeowner.
Yeah, and in that instance, one of the things you can do, they're probably not paying their assessments. I'd be surprised if they were both paying their assessments and allowing their homes to become that deteriorated. So what you can do is move to foreclosure, and that's going to get somebody's attention.
Okay.
If it doesn't, you're going to end up with the house, and you can at least then take care of the problem. You can board it up, you can paint it, you can do whatever you need to. We've done that in several situations where we've just taken possession of a property that's been abandoned like that, and then we can manage it on behalf of the community until the owner finally comes along. Sometimes you find out owners have died, family members didn't know that the house existed. You can poke around the deed records and public records and really figure out what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions from anybody that's present? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so in all the education from the board perspective, legal side of the house, what if you have a situation that you have done what the homeowner has asked and done your due diligence to make the accommodations for landscape, water runoff, etc. And now, they're happy campers, supposedly, on 2 occasions over a number of years. And now they're making it a public venue to go around and talk to other residents, campaign against, not the board, but bringing on another management company and addressing it to the board. I'm not into I try to, step back, and obviously we're going to have feelings, but this isn't a feeling thing. This is something we did under 2 presidents and took care of it. So as a response, I always send it to Goodwin and say, just to FYI, looping you in, letting you know what's going on. But, you get into that did to, did not. So of course I want to be the adult because that's what our board should be doing. It's really sad. I was just going to say, when we get older, and I can say that, when we get older, we just say thanks. and you don't really know what you're writing and you just send it out. You're thinking, what's going on here? You know, you have to do that fine line. And when somebody starts to campaign, this has happened another time when people wanted to do the same thing. But if we have no qualms with what we, Goodwin, our management company, one, you don't want to respond to that part, and two, you just want to go, okay, thanks for your email. But that doesn't solve the problem. At the end of the day, that doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, I would say, education, communication goes a long way. And sometimes it takes, putting together a town hall or scheduling some time so that we have a public discussion about whatever those feelings are. And, I find, man, 80% of the stuff that comes across my desk are things that are just a lack of awareness or understanding of how things work. And so it's really just having the opportunity to get together and say, let's address whatever, questions, concerns you have, and be able to, just provide all sides of the story. And I think oftentimes people just want to be heard. If they ever get to a point where they're upset about something, they just don't feel like there's, like they've had the outlet to do so. And so they'll create their own outlet by campaigning and doing things that are, really can be resolved with some level of discussion. Now, will they show up to that, forum? Sometimes they don't. They prefer to do it via email or anything else. But I try very hard whenever we have situations like that. It's amazing the turnaround that can happen when we just get in a room together and talk. And we haven't had a chance to do a lot of that in the last couple of years. And so things have festered just because of COVID. But having an opportunity to really create forums for discussion and help understand, their viewpoints is healthy. And I think, more often than not, that helps to kind of comfort folks, that have an impression of the way things are when they may not be.
I completely agree. And I think an open forum is a great way to handle those types of complaints. And sometimes you get these kinds of issues that bubble up in a community, and you've got one very vocal person in the community, and then you might have a couple little minions, and that activity has the board. This happens so often that it's a pattern that happens frequently, but it has the board reacting, thinking that everybody in the community is lighting up the torches and sharpening the pitchforks, and oh, here they come for us. And it turns out that probably not as many people care as much as you might think. You described, for instance, that you've got 2 people on the ACC for a 1,200 unit community. That tells me you're lacking volunteers. And if you're lacking volunteers, that's just kind of the definition of apathy. And so if you can't get people to volunteer to be on the architectural control committee, the person that's having all these complaints and wants to fire Goodwin and get all the people off the board, they're not getting any traction either because nobody cares.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting that what you're doing isn't important. It is. It's just that it's not that much fun to be on the board of directors of a homeowners association. And congratulations to you all for taking on that role and taking it seriously, but not a lot of other people are going to. And so sometimes what I find is that board members fear that the community is acting against them, but it turns out it's a very, very small number of people that don't even have the numbers that they would need to either fire you or fire them.
I think too here, right, there's a difference here. While we're related, they're 2 different communities.
Sure.
I'm a 1,200 person community. She's a 22. So that's 20% of her community.
But that's the same,
And I hear
but
you.
it goes to your
To the
point.
bench, right?
2 things. It's that our jobs are thankless jobs. We know that. We signed up for it because nobody else will do the job. So, at the end of the day, it's still the same thing. It's apathy. You're
Well,
right. Yeah, it's apathy.
That's those guys that are the squeakers and the ones that are making the noise. That's your opportunity to tell them, hey, you know what? I hear you. Why don't you get on the board and why don't you help us with this?
Yeah.
And once they get on the board and they learn, really the way it is and what the covenants are and the rules, the regulations, then they begin to understand, oh, I'm so embarrassed that I complained about something as stupid as this.
I completely agree, and transparency is the key to preventing these types of things from bubbling up. A lot of times people have a fear of the dark. They just don't know. They know that they pay $100 every quarter for dues, but they don't have any idea where all that goes to. They don't even know about the drainage easement that is 48% of your budget. They don't know about the fact that there's all of these strips of land that your landscapers have to mow. And once they finally learn what all these obligations are that the developers saddled on the association, they go, oh, okay, yeah, thanks, I don't want to be involved anymore. Have a nice day. So transparency is the best way to do it. Involve people as much as you can. And again, you know, common sense and give them the information that they seek. If they're complaining about the management company, you know, show them the numbers, show them the budget, show them what you get for your money. Because I think, like Mitch said, communication, education are key, and I think transparency goes right along with that.
If you really have a contentious situation, I'll tell you, creating a forum, whether it's online or in person, and inviting like Adam for like an open Q&A of the homeowner, so that it's not management, it's not the board, it's the association's legal counsel answering questions factually. Man, does that take?
Yeah, blame it on the
people's
attorney.
sales.
Yeah, he
No,
just, he just
you know,
volunteered.
But taking, you know, being able to, the education factor is so important, and being able to say, hey, this is why this is, and here's what the law says about it, and being able to break that down really just takes that. I mean, because everybody's citing, like with the Google searches now, every day I get an email from somebody saying, well, you know, copying and pasting something off of some HOA website that doesn't even pertain to Texas or their association, saying this is what Google says. And you have to say, hey, this isn't even the same state that we're referencing here. And so it's just a matter of combating all of that noise with facts. And I think, you know, for what it's worth to have, you know, an opportunity to do that and really educate, boy, does that go a long way.
Right. But
Some of these
your website would offer that platform, right? If I understood part of that, those categories to.
Potentially, what I'm saying is like you have a contentious issue or someone spreading misinformation, being able to just have like an open forum, the town hall and the community, and saying, hey, we're gonna invite you know, our attorney, and being able to do that brings so much order and education to it. Like I can go in there and say all I want, but they'll say, no, you're the management company, you have your own interest, right? Or the board says, no, let me like highlight it in the statute, and they're like, no, I'm not taking your word for it. But man, when this guy steps into a room, like it carries weight, and they might not like the answer, but when you're citing, you know, specifically where and why and everything else, man, does that just
Because people never read the fine.
no, and I love it when that loudmouth is in that board meeting, just threatening all this, and you know, somebody like Adam walks in and he says, nope, that's not true, and here's why. They don't show up anymore. It's awesome. And so just a thought. I mean, if you're dealing with stuff like that and you're dealing with that noise, yeah, there's ways to be able to take care of that very, very quickly.
Well, I think you already gave me the solutions. I'll just say, if you want to refer to the year-end budget for next year and this one that will be, you know, roll up a report.
Yes, but the budget,
But
yeah,
the expenditures are in there.
yeah,
And not to want to personalize it or grant.
yeah.
Those expenses went into landscaping.
Yeah.
If you want to get more familiar with that, let us know.
Yeah.
If you want to volunteer on the board, we can
There's a
certainly.
committee for that. You don't get to work, we'll put you to work, right?
That
But
way you know exactly
Yeah.
how much of your money.
the answer is not always, and I get this all the time, like, you know, hey, we'll send you a copy of the budget, but looking at a budget, really, there's so many questions, right? And so it just leads to more and more questions because they don't see the invoice, they don't see the contracts, and it ends up becoming a very large discovery process and trying to help, you know, answer that. Sometimes it takes, you know, maybe in these, you know, I love boards that have these budget workshops where they invite the homeowners, and it's, you know, they can't contribute or get in the way of just being able to get through this workshop, if you will. But you know, being able to listen to it, being able to have, you know, PowerPoint up where you show, you know, bar graphs of where our money's going and why, and, you know, things of that nature. Reserve studies are so important. If you don't have a reserve study in place, a reserve study to be able to show the community what the long-term ramifications of not setting money aside today for these long-term replacements and saying, here's the replacement value of our pool. And if we don't start to fund that, here's what it's going to cost you in X number of years. And that education really does a lot to try to create awareness around this is the why. It's not because we're trying to pat our pockets. It's because we're just trying to keep this thing moving. And we're just trying to, to protect the long term here.
Yeah, so would the boot camp be, our
Yeah.
example be a good problem to solve and a venue for that?
Oh, sure, for sure.
Yeah,
That'd be
so
great.
Cool.
I'll volunteer my
Awesome.
problem.
All right.
Thank you all.
Let me just get to.
You're gonna mail this or email
Yeah,
this?
I'm gonna
presentation to
email
everyone?
everybody who's in person and online. We'll get a copy of the PowerPoint and the recording. And you'll have that. Let's see. A lot of questions. Hey, if anybody wants me to unmute them, they want a question, please don't hesitate. Click the little raise hand icon and I'll get to you. Couple other questions that came in. Oh, here's a good question. I've heard this one before and I'd love your thoughts on this. So there seems to be confusion as to the definition of a shed versus an accessory building. Document states accessory dwellings are strongly discouraged. And it says no manufactured sheds. There's dispute over what is a manufactured shed. Some say metal and some say anything built on site. Some board members say sheds are a form of an ADU. Any thoughts on kind of that,
Well,
the minutia of understanding the interpretation of how
if
those,
we're just talking about words, a shed is not somewhere where you live.
right?
An ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. You're supposed to live in an ADU.
Right.
So an ADU is not a shed. Now, that doesn't mean that I just answered your question.
Yeah.
Because the definition for whatever you're talking about is going to be found in your governing documents. And so something's going to be prohibited, something else is going to be allowed. And that's where we're going to find the answer. Now, to suggest that a shed has to be prefabricated, I don't think that that's true. If the term that is being used is a manufactured building, well, that means it's been manufactured off-site.
Right.
And so we know what that is. It's really going to matter what your declaration says more than what I think a shed is versus an ADU. And so, as you're going to probably hear me say to almost every question that'll ever be asked, we're going to have to look at your governing documents. There's not really a general answer to that question. And as we've developed these governing documents over time, as communities have developed, so have building practices. And so ADUs was not something they taught us in law school. We didn't have that term, 15, 17 years ago. So you're going to have to find either a definition in the declaration or we're going to have to figure it out together.
Good question. And this is one that's pretty popular. And if you're new to the board, it's going to happen to you. Social media. A shameless plug. Adam and I did a good hour and a half long social media
Yes, we did.
webinar. You can find that on our Facebook page. And if you need the link to that, let me know. But a question on social media, is there anything that a board member should not post on social media? Is there anything, how do we approach that form of communication, which is incredibly important, given that that's where people are most easily engaged, but also where the most
Common sense.
misinformation.
Just use common sense.
Unfortunately, social media is the Wild West. People can go on there, they can say anything they want. It can be true, it can be false, it can be completely irrelevant. As a lawyer that serves HOAs, I can tell you, I hate social media. It almost never produces any kind of benefit, at least in my view. Certainly, you can use it to do things like post meeting notices, and this is when the neighborhood-wide garage sale is going to take place, and it's great for posting information. But the discussions that take place almost 100% of the time devolve into something that is not productive. And so all I can say is, as a board member, you should feel free to communicate just like everybody else on there, except you should try to stay in the factual side of things. This is when the meeting's going to be. We spent $24,000 on landscaping last year. Saying things that are true and factual refrain from opinions. Yes, you've got the First Amendment right to say whatever you want. Just because you're a board member doesn't mean but you shouldn't. And you should rise above it. You should encourage people to act like adults. And as a board member, you should probably refrain from taking a position on an issue that's going to be voted on, from suggesting that somebody that's posting on there is out of their mind. You should post things that are true. You can certainly refute factual statements other people have made, but try to keep it factual, and try to keep. And certainly you could get on there and you could say, this is my personal opinion. I'm a board member. This is not the opinion of the board. But I would suggest that as a board member, you've probably given up the right to post your opinion on Nextdoor. That's not a legal opinion. I just think you should stay above the rumor mill and everything else that happens on there. If you're on the board of directors, it's going to keep you in a more professional capacity, and it's going to lend credibility to the entire board to be silent. I know that a lot of times people are on there, they're saying all kinds of crazy stuff, and you feel compelled to get on there and refute it. If you're going to do that, keep it factual, keep it professional, and try to stay away from the personal stuff.
And a couple things to add to that. One, invite people to board meetings, right? Like, you can't meet everybody where they are. They need to come to where business is happening. And if they are really invested in the business of the association, post when the next board meeting is and say, hey, we've got an open forum section where we'll be happy to listen to your concerns and, take your questions. There are certainly, a lot of our boards, a lot of our communities do a good job of like pinning at the top of their Facebook like neighborhood page. Hey, any community association questions or concerns, please post or please submit a request on Town Square so that we have it itemized, that we have it timestamped, and we can address it accordingly. That really helps. And just a continuous reminder that, hey, this Facebook page is not the official place of business of the association. Many of us don't even have control over those neighborhood Facebook pages. So they go rogue. So, kind of bringing folks back into where we communicate is important. One other thing, and maybe this is in reference to Rita's point earlier, community association communication is very different than governmental communication. Oftentimes, and you probably get this a lot, like, there's an assumption that the way that like city council members communicate, that they're not allowed to communicate outside of meetings, or that they're only allowed to communicate in certain fashion, that's the same as how we treat community associations. Very different.
Exactly.
Yeah, does not apply.
We get a lot of times we get people that are complaining, they're upset, and they accuse us of violating the Open Meetings Act.
Yes, correct.
Doesn't apply. Just there are provisions in Chapter 209 that are called the Open Meetings provisions, but it's not the Open Meetings Act, and the obligations of the government to comply with the Open Meetings Act is a very, very, very high threshold. And the Open Meetings provisions of Chapter 209 is somewhere more like down here. But that's a good example of a mistake that people assume.
Yep. Martha, I'm gonna I'll unmute you and Susan in case you have a question. You should be able to unmute.
Yeah. Can you hear me, or do I need to type?
No, we got you, Susan.
Okay, yeah. I spoke with someone at Goodwin, and we are trying to, we have one pretty big overdue account. And he had suggested the possibility of sending it to collections as opposed to the attorney, in order to, I guess, save some money. We don't have we're a very tiny community, not a lot of money available. So is that a good option?
No, I would tell you, I don't know. I don't even know of any collections companies. We typically work with the association's legal counsel, and they know exactly how to proceed on collecting on those past due assessments. So not sure who that was or what the suggestion was there, but typically it goes from, we take it as far as we can on that file, and we hand it right over to the attorney. And, you know, if it was Adam, we would, you know, he knows exactly where to advise his clients on when to take action on those accounts and address that. And oftentimes, honestly, when you initiate the proceedings, they can get months of communication from us and not be fazed by it. But when the attorney starts to, you know, take action, it immediately begins engagement. So that's really a big part of the reason why we go down that path. It's not, it doesn't have to be anything incredibly costly. It's something that can just compel action because they now know that you mean business, right?
Well,
Right. Go ahead.
I'm assuming that the reason that the idea is that we would save money by using a collection agency is because the collection agency would collect it on a contingent basis. But back in 2011, the legislature in Texas passed a law that says that homeowners association assessments can't be collected on a contingent basis. So whatever benefit you might be achieving through a collections agency, you probably, you know, aren't really able to realize. And also they can't threaten to foreclose, which is your best tool. And it's what brings these matters to a head so quickly. So I would encourage you to look into another way to do it.
Yeah, I get questions about it all the time about these third-party collections companies because they market on, you know, online and stuff, and they say, hey, no cost, right, to the association. But you know what Adam references is exactly that. Many of them are referring to states in which they can, you know, work on a contingency basis. That's not the case here. So,
Okay.
so I would maintain that relationship with legal counsel and go down the normal path, and that should take you far.
Okay, and then just real quick, you had mentioned deed restriction letters are only going to the homeowners. They are not going to the property.
That's right. Yeah, so whatever the owner of record is, it's either, you know, if the owner never alerts us as your managing agent that they've moved, it depends on, you know, most associations don't have a policy where we're collecting a lease and being able to manage that information. So, so in a situation where the only address of record is the home address, or a forwarding address or mailing address that's separate and apart from the lot in which they own, we will direct communication to whatever that preferred address is. Otherwise it defaults. And what we find, unfortunately, is that the homeowner won't update that address, or they're an investor who own multiple properties and you're at the mercy of whatever leasing management company they have on these accounts. Some of them do a really good job of working with the tenant, others not so much. Oftentimes we do have an email address, so they are receiving it simultaneously when we send. So homeowners should be receiving a violation notice via email the night that it is submitted, the night that it's reported. So around 11 o'clock or so, the system pushes these via emails, and they'll actually get the exact same letter that they're going to get by mail. They'll get via email as well.
Is that something new?
No, we've been doing it for at least since I've been here for a better part of 3 years. Yeah.
Okay, interesting, because one of the reasons I stepped up to get on the board was because I got a deed restriction letter.
Yeah.
I'm actually not I mean, I own the home, but I live in the next neighborhood over. My son is the one who's living in the home at the moment. I never received an email, but wasn't in the new Texas legislature 209 requiring management companies to get the information about leases and whatnot and have it on file?
No, there was a section of the new provisions that were passed that actually limit how much information you can get from an owner about a lease. Used to be you could collect pretty much anything you wanted. Now there are 4 or 5 pieces of information you can get, like the name of the tenant, you know, contact information, the length of the term, but you can no longer ask for a copy of the lease.
Yeah, no, I'm not asking about the copy of the lease, but as far as, you know, who is the resident in the property, at least you could, you know, I would think it would make it easier to address to the the leaser of the property as well as the owner of the property. So they're aware, like this fella said. I mean, we have a lot of people in our neighborhood who own homes there that live in California. Well, I'm pretty sure they're not going to call up their tenant to say, hey, this is my fourth letter that's coming for 4 months straight about your trash cans being out. They don't care. They don't live there.
Well, they will if they keep getting fined.
Fines.
So if they get
We,
fined,
we can't assess fines in our neighborhood. So what is our recourse in that instance? If the tenant is not being informed by the owner in California who doesn't give a hoot, then what is our recourse as far as getting it, minor infractions like that?
Well, you can make sure that the notice also goes to the property address. There's nothing wrong with sending a notice to multiple addresses. You can do that.
Okay, because I was told by our property manager that it was going to the address in the neighborhood, the address in the neighborhood as well as the owner address, say in California.
and what happens from a tenant's perspective is that they get mail with the homeowner's name on it and they don't open it. So they just start piling up or they throw it out and don't really care. They're not invested in making sure the owner has their mail. And so that kind
Yeah.
of runs into it as well, unfortunately.
So there's really not a whole lot of recourse other than knocking on doors potentially.
Communities that have a good policy around communicating a policy around leasing, like leases in attendance, her community has a process and procedure for making sure that we know who the tenant is. Now she's in a condominium, so a little different in that there's also lease restrictions that need to be managed. So, right. So it's a little bit of a different process than your normal subdivision. But that certainly gives us the ability to know that tenant because they go through a process. Some communities even have an orientation. It just depends on, it depends on what you have the ability to do, collect, and how we get access to that information if it's not a requirement.
Okay. Thank you.
You got it. Thank you. All right. Well, I think that does it for questions. We will we'll send out the information. I always try to copy Adam on that recap. So if there's anything that you'd like to talk to Adam about, kind of have a sidebar. He's always always up for discussion. And I want to thank Adam for his time as always. Thank you for being here. One of the best in the business, and just grateful for all of you. We had such a great turnout tonight. Thank you so much for making the time to be here to learn more about how to be a better board member. And man, if I could have every board member go through a process like this, it would make life so much easier. So appreciate you guys taking this seriously, being students of this, and showing just how much you care about doing this right. So thank you, Adam, for your time.
Well, thanks a lot,
And
Mitch.
until the next one.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for attending. Bye-bye.
You bet.
Yeah.
So as a director of operations, of course, your presentation, both of y'all's presentations, I'm sitting here like a bobblehead. Yes. The engagement, right, over COVID has greatly declined